Hey, everyone. Welcome to Locked On Lakers for Tuesday. Brian Kamenetsky and Andy Kamenetsky. We've been talking about trading Russell Westbrook and Russell Westbrook getting bought out, Andy. But what if he doesn't think of himself as a buyout kind of guy? That's next on Locked On Lakers.
You are Locked On Lakers, your daily Los Angeles Lakers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks to everybody for making Locked On Lakers your first listen of every day, Monday through Friday, no matter how or where you get your podcasts. Make another Locked On podcast your second listen of every day, only after making us your first. You can make us your second and make another one your third as well. Basically listen to us first. Locked On Lakers on YouTube. We're pushing 8,000 subscribers. Would love for you to get involved with that. Get us across that threshold, become part of a really vibrant community of commenters and listeners and viewers and comment leavers and talking to each other, talking to us. We try to respond to as many of those as we can and use them in the show as well, including, Andy, for the topic that's really front and center today on the show. Somebody left an interesting comment last week that noted after the Pat Bev press conference, and like Russ is there and it's kind of awkward and he's trying.
He's giving daps and he's throwing Pat Beverley a towel. The first assist of the year, first time.
He looked like the awkward, new kid at school. You mentioned it, I think, in the show talking about that day. He's trying to do all the right stuff, and he's trying to be the guy who fits in and show that he's a team player and all that. It's definitely, there's something palpable, and a couple of commenters noticed that they almost feel sympathy for him. They almost feel bad for the guy because it's so awkward and it's so obvious that it's awkward that he's kind of ginning up some sympathy.
Yeah, I mean, it's not an apples to apples comparison, Brian, but it reminds me a bit of Ron Artest's first season with the Lakers when he was the only non-carryover from the 2009 championship team. He subbed in for Trevor Ariza. Everybody else was a holdover, and he was hyper aware of the narrative that if the Lakers did not repeat, it's because Ron Artest is just too big of a distraction, too unreliable, too erratic. And Ron went so out of his way to just always be trying to do the right things with, a couple exceptions, couple butting heads with Phil Jackson. But for the most part, he was so publicly and painstakingly trying to do the right thing that was actually kind of adorable in its own way. You could just see this with Ron, who's really, in all honesty, now meta, he's a really inherently sweet guy. He really is. And he was just trying so hard to please. Russell Westbrook is not going out of his way to please. I think we can all agree on that. But it nonetheless is awkward. And it raised that question that put out on a Twitter poll at Cam Brothers. We've had comments on the Locked On Lakers YouTube channel expressing sympathy for Westbrook over such a disastrous Lakers homecoming. Note, most still want him traded, but nonetheless feel for him. Looking for a consensus among Laker fans, how do you feel? And as of this recording, about 4 or 5 hours into it, 65% say they do not feel bad for Russ. 35% say they do. A sampling of some comments from Ramley Show. He's making $47 million. Feel bad for him. Ha ha ha. He can play in Alaska for all I care. Making $47 million. Who cares? Ken Snyder says comes with the territory of signing a max deal. Max deals mean all-star is a foregone conclusion. It means you should be one of the top 10 players in the league. It means if you fail, the heat is coming. From Pat Bev's season, if he tried to change his game and did what his coaches and teammates asked him to do and still is a bad fit, that's one thing. But I have not seen him take any personal accountability for how he contributed to how the season turned out. No sympathy for me. That's very much the vibe we're getting from a lot of people with Russell.
Yeah, 35% kind of feel bad for him. I was shocked the number was that high.
Yeah, a couple sympathetic comments from say Darth Lilliam. I feel bad for him, but he still needs to go. Maybe if he'd come here in the pre-LeBron days with all the Laker babies, but he just does not fit in with his team. That said, hopefully he plays well this season. We can get something of value back from him. Ken at Anaheim Hills, I thought made a really interesting distinction. He said, I have empathy, but not necessarily sympathy. Russ has the ability to be a top 10 player and is paid for that. He didn't perform that was last year. You know, like it's an interesting thing. I mean, there's a lot of sentiment similar to DJ Trunks. The guy said he doesn't care about winning. Don't feel bad about that. Carlos G said he's laughing all the way to the bank. You know, there is
I don't
lot.
think he goes. It's probably direct deposit.
Absolutely.
I doubt he visits his local branch.
Go live, no sympathy due to his lack of self-awareness. Our friend Nathan Mark, screw him. Play with the right effort and want, and you'll get all the adulation from fans. And then fucking guy, here's my thing. He came here under an agreement to sacrifice for the betterment of the team and spent an entire season not doing that. Ignorance isn't a reason. It's an excuse, and I won't feel bad for an excuse. Shrug emoji.
So the guy kind of hit on my talking point, which is I feel very little sympathy for Russ for all of the reasons people mentioned.
Yeah, and maybe when I put the tweet out, it should have been empathy rather than sympathy.
Or both. Sympathy, empathy, what do you feel? So I feel zero sympathy because he has shown no self-awareness, because he lit his teammates on fire in his exit interview. For all of these other things, he is making $47 million. It's like there's not a lot to feel sympathetic for. I do feel some level of empathy. And it's interesting because to me, it's less about Russ specifically than I just feel over time. Maybe it's a function of me getting a little older, covering guys long enough to see them go through the beginning of their career all the way up through the end of it. And I think, despite all of the fantastic storytelling, despite all of the insight that we get now, fans and sometimes even media often miss just how hard it is for professional athletes to adjust, to remake themselves, to do all these things, whether it's to prolong their careers, whether it's to find happiness outside of sports, to adjust to sort of civilian life, whatever it is. And I think because these guys, from the moment they were old enough to walk, have basically dedicated themselves to this. This is what they live and breathe and train for, and it requires an enormous amount. Even the guys that we joke around, if they paid attention to their diet, they do all this, like, to get into the league and get the level, it requires an extraordinary amount of commitment. And when you are in a position to have to take that away, I think we underestimate it. It's particularly hard when you are at the most elite level, when you've done what Russell Westbrook has done, when you did what Carmelo Anthony did, and somebody tells you you're not good enough anymore. Your whole life has been predicated on, yes, I am. I have empathy for the situation Russ is in because it's so difficult. And it's not really related to Russ specifically, but just what I think I believe he's going through as a human. That said, I don't have a lot of sympathy. I don't.
Well, coming up, we can get a little bit into the particulars of this and like why specifically. I think if people do have levels of sympathy, empathy, both for Russ, why the specifics of it being Russ and like what he is specifically going through. If you're going to have sympathy at all, why you might have it, but also too, why some of those specifics in the same respect leave you with no sympathy or empathy.
And a very interesting scenario put out last week on the Zach Lowe podcast that I think will wipe all of it away for every Laker fan should it come to fruition. So that's next.
Locked on Lakers brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline.net, your number one source for all your pro and college football betting needs and sports info this season. The NFL is underway, and as always, it is glorious. Find all the latest football league developments, game matchups, news, and podcasts. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sporting wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. The fastest and easiest way to check in on all of your favorite sports and events, including MLB, MMA, boxing, and golf. But we have not forgotten about the NBA, Locked On Lakers Familia. If you are looking to get ahead of the 2023 season, maybe lay down some early action, the Lakers are currently getting 20-1 odds to win the title. They are 6-point underdogs opening the season against Golden State, but perhaps ring night will prove a little bit too distracting for the Warriors to focus. And Russell Westbrook getting 150 to 1 odds to win his second MVP. Talk about, Brian, reestablishing your value around the league, particularly if he did it after getting bought out. Without any research, I'm confident in saying that would be a first. So head to the website today, use your mobile device, learn more about the trends in action, bet online where the game starts.
All right. So I laid out my position here. Like I feel like people underestimate how hard it is for Russell Westbrook to change, just adjust, take a back seat. Nobody's wrong. Nobody's wrong about that. They are correct. Like, he is a professional. He is on this team. If he wants it to work, he's got to try to at least make a much more concerted effort than he did last year to make those adjustments. But I just think for somebody, particularly somebody who's built like Russ, who has built his career in the way that Russ has, in almost sort of open defiance of so many norms and conventions, and clinging to his style and individuality in the chip. I just think people underestimate how hard that is to do. You had thoughts.
Yeah. I mean, look, it is difficult. And as much as it feels obvious to Laker fans, people covering the team, I'm sure Russ's teammates and coaches, because it is obvious, it still is difficult when you're the guy doing it. And, sometimes self-awareness, self-evaluation is just like a true look in the mirror. There's a reason that none of us like doing this in the most difficult parts in our lives. Like, it's not unique to Russell Westbrook that in these moments of uncomfortable honesty, he either doesn't want to go there, is incapable of doing it, or both. But there's also just the element of the homecoming for Russ. And, Russ downplayed this as the season got worse. Said that he didn't have expectations heading into this year, which is just a load of crap. He talked about these expectations in his introductory press conference, but what being a positive part of this franchise would mean to him. Like, even if you think the primary motivation of requesting a trade to the Lakers was to be close to his family, being back in LA, and that might have been the case. This is somebody who grew up as a Laker fan. He is an LA guy, and he was close to Kobe, and Kobe thought highly of him. He used to refer to Russ as an a-hole, like in a way that was meant as a compliment and a term of endearment. Like Kobe used to say the same things about Rajon Rondo. He used to call him an a-hole. He also meant it as a compliment and term of endearment. And like, there's this, that being a part of the Lakers in a positive way for an LA native and somebody that Los Angeles still means a lot to, you can't tell me that if this situation went well, it wouldn't mean a lot to Russ. And like, Russ is very me against the world, and you're either with me or against me. So right now, he may be treating LA as an enemy of sorts, but it's a defense mechanism. And, it becomes easier to do that. It becomes easier to do that too when it feels like the city is not just turned against you, it's turned against your family. And he has felt some of that ugliness. And really, some of this was out of bounds at games when you see your family treated that way by Laker fans and by Angelinos. And again, even acknowledging how much of this is in Russ's control attitudinally, with body language, with the way he talks about this stuff, with focus, priorities, all that stuff. And he is failing along those lines. There is a part of me that can understand having empathy for what he wanted this situation to be and what it isn't.
Right. Because he's not like an axe
murderer. Right.
He's not a bad human. It's just, it's one of those things where I Carmelo Anthony fell out of the league. Dwight nearly fell out. All these great redemption stories, the arc of how, a lot of these guys that we point to got to where, this praiseworthy place, is very difficult to do. And, he is an enormously prideful guy. And I know, we've had this argument back and forth. And I don't even bring it up to rehash it, about just like how much Russ cares about what other people are saying and think. And I think in this particular case, the commentary has hurt him, in part because at his core, he knows it's true. He knows the comments about his play are true. I think he's probably at his core, at his very deepest core, has concerns that the comments about his declining athleticism and what that means for his future and how long he can be quote unquote Russell Westbrook and all that are true. They are accurate, and that has got to be pretty scary for somebody who has gone through who's so much. And athletes will say, like, I am much more than I am a basketball player. That's true, but you're also very much a basketball player. Like, it's not that this stuff doesn't mean anything to you at all. You just don't want to be defined solely by it. And for that part of your mortality to kind of throw itself in front of you in a way that, in your heart of hearts, the pride thing, though, is interesting because Ramona Shelburne mentioned on Zach Lowe's podcast, correct?
Yes.
That, they were talking about this, the Low Post, and they were talking about this idea of Russ being traded and bought out or whatever. And Ramona brought up the point that, Russ doesn't, like most guys, doesn't think of himself as a buyout guy, like somebody you pay, you trade for and you pay to go away. By the way, we are both available for that bargain if anybody is.
That is the greatest, the idea of being paid millions of dollars, in Russ's case, tens of millions of dollars, to literally be anywhere but your job. I mean, just chef's kiss. It
sounds fantastic. She raises at least the scenario in which a team acquiring Westbrook, that Westbrook wouldn't accept a buyout, which I guess in some ways is honorable. Like, I would insist on playing and being paid, but oh my God, that would be a complicating factor for the Lakers to try to trade him, because if that's the case, if the team that acquires him has to keep him, and he wouldn't accept a buyout, and wouldn't kind of quietly go into the night and take a deal with another team at some point, nobody's going to trade for him. Nobody. I'm not saying this is going to happen, but I'm saying in this scenario, he is quite literally untradeable.
Yeah, I mean, I've been thinking about this actually before I heard Ramona talk about this. It's something that I'd meant to bring up as a potential, complicating factor in these deals. And look, there could be owners who just say, at the end of the day, if we're willing to pay him, say $44 million or $42 million in a buyout to go away, we could be willing to pay $47 million. At the end of the day, the 2 first-round picks that we get from the Lakers would make it
right.
worth it.
I just mean but it's not even a question of the money. Like, just the concept of being bought out. No.
I'm talking about this. I'm talking about this from the owner's perspective, not Russ's perspective. With Russ, I mean, it could be about the money, because often for athletes, money and pride become intertwined in ways that are beyond economics. It's about, you are placing a dollar amount that defines my value and what I mean as a commodity in this league. So it's, athletes always say that, it's business, it's not personal. It's always personal when it's your business. When it's your contract, it is always personal.
I'm talking about you, and when, because contracts are to some degree a referendum on you.
Right. But I was talking about this, though, from an owner's perspective, in terms of being a complicating factor. Like, there might be some owners who ultimately decide that it's worth eating the entire $47 million in order to get the picks, and using a roster spot for the entire year. If, say, you can't move Russ at the deadline for, to another team that might be just looking to give up some problematic longer-term contracts of their own, like something like that. There might be some owners who say, it's worth it in the end to get those picks.
Fine, he stays here. He's on the roster. He plays. He doesn't
But
play. Whatever.
There will be owners, there's already a reluctance to pay Russell Westbrook what will at least be in the $40 million range to not play. Because other than the Hornets, I have not heard about a single team that has been even vaguely linked to Westbrook that would even consider putting him on the court. And they're considered like a pretty dark horse candidate to begin with. So all of these teams would have to be willing to swallow $40+ million to have a guy not play. But then you take into account, again, he's taking up a roster spot that maybe could be used for more of a developmental guy that we could be taking a shot with as a rebuilding team, get a better look. And also for somebody like Utah, who appears to have some reluctance about doing this to begin with, they might decide at the end of the day, we would rather just sell off, or trade off Jordan Clarkson and Mike Conley and Bojan Bogdanovic and these guys individually, because we might get a better lump sum of assets in return, but also it's just more palatable than paying a guy $40-something million, to not play, but to not even get bought out, to not even play ball in this scenario.
Ramona wasn't reporting that this is a thing, and I think if it was a thing, it actually would be out there. If there were hints that of Westbrook, not that you got to find the right number for $47 million to buy him out, which is, by the way, completely normal in these situations. A big number, and the numbers are the figure itself is a little unprecedented.
John Wall eventually got bought out by Houston and got signed by the Clippers for the exact same dollar amount that he got bought out.
Correct. And so it's not unprecedented in theory, but I don't think it's a 0% chance thing. And the biggest reason that I think it's relevant to the conversation we'll have when we move on to Pau here next is just that it is related to that pride thing. It is related to the self-sense, the self-perception that I think Russ has, the stubbornness and the belief in yourself. Can you imagine Kobe ever in a situation where he would have thought of himself and accepted himself as somebody who would be traded and bought out?
Look,
he would have retired before that happened. I think,
I've shared this story before, but when Lamar Odom was made sixth man, he was initially really resistant to this, really angry about this. And, there was a practice session where afterwards he went off on Phil Jackson. He went off on the whole concept and he was mad. And afterwards, Kobe was asked about this. And Kobe said, I think very sincerely, that he thought this could be a really good role for Lamar, that, he would get to run his own unit and he could have a lot more sort of his fingerprints during these quarters where he was out there with the bench mob. And, at the end of the day, Lamar was still one of the best players on this team. And he would play closing minutes and crunch time and the most important high leverage minutes. And he sincerely meant all this. And I asked Kobe, and I was really specific in the way I phrased this. I said, could you ever picture yourself playing that type of role towards the very end of your career? And he just looks at me and goes, that's the dumbest question you've ever asked me. And basically what he was saying was, it's a great role for Lamar, not me. I ain't doing it.
And Russ thinks of himself much more as a Kobe than a Lamar. So speaking of supporting characters, Andy, Pau Gasol is going to be inducted into the, he's going to have his jersey raised up in the rafters and is eventually going to be in the NBA Hall of Fame, the Basketball Hall of Fame. That looks like it's going to be 2025. Could end up going in at least as a player by himself, which raises all kinds of interesting questions. And I think there may not be a person more uniquely qualified to have what are now very specific, I don't know if burden's the right word, but it might be in terms of his Hall of Fame candidacy than Pau. So we'll do that next. All right. So ESPN, Andy, because this was Hall of Fame weekend with Manu and Tim Hardaway went in as players.
My wife is a huge Spurs fan, so I happened to see the video of Manu getting inducted in his speech. It was awesome. He's phenomenal. Yeah, he's one of my all-time favorite players.
And so ESPN had a thing kind of looking forward to the next few years of Hall of Fame inductions, and you get to 2025, and the only player that jumps out as a stone cold lock is Pau, which means he would go into the Hall at least as a player. I'm sure there could be coaches and contributors and broadcast, whatever, but as a player would go in by himself.
Well, an NBA player, if nothing else.
NBA
There could be a women's basketball great.
Correct. Among NBA, it's important to be specific. You're right. There are so many things now that are contextually different about Pau's legacy, any post-career honor, and any of that stuff that is different than any other player, because obviously everything that honors Pau is a time when people are going to stop and think about and reflect on Kobe.
Yeah.
When Pau has his jersey raised up into the rafters this year, it's in March, I think it is, correct?
Yes.
In a game against the Grizzlies. That night is, in a lot of ways, going to be about Kobe and who isn't there. When Pau in 2025 is inducted, every Hall of Fame inductee is introduced by another member of the Hall of Fame. Do you have any doubt at all that would have been Kobe for Pau?
Absolutely not. I mean, if Kobe were still alive, I would have bet a ton of money he would have been the one to induct Pau. Like, first of all, you have to be inducted by a Hall of Famer. That's the rules of the Hall, unless there's a very specific exception, like, for example, tragic circumstances. Vanessa Bryant really inducted Kobe, because of, again, very specific, very tragic circumstances. But unless there was like an international player or figure, or I don't know, maybe Phil Jackson,
maybe somehow something that comes up. But generally speaking, this is how it works.
Right. And unless it was somebody like that either like thematically or for a basketball backstory meant more to Pau, I can't think of anybody more obvious and fitting than Kobe. I guarantee Kobe would have wanted to do this. And Kobe would have been terrific. He would have given an incredible speech, because Kobe was really good at that sort of thing. And, Pau is obviously linked and he's very linked to Kobe, but in a lot of ways, Kobe's very linked to Pau, because Pau is seen as the player that truly solidified Kobe's second half of his career with the Lakers, and in the second half of his success. And even though history gets a little bit fuzzy and the Lakers were moving in the right direction that season before they acquired Pau, there's no question Pau took them to a level where if everybody was healthy and the roster was built correctly, they were always going to be in that conversation. And, I've talked about how before, like, if you had a bunch of basketball scientists and put them in a lab and said, create the perfect complement, skill-wise, basketball intellect-wise, temperamentally wise, all of that sort of stuff for Kobe, it would have been Pau. And it dawned on me today, because we were thinking about the connection with the jersey being raised up. And I don't mean this like in a cheesy numerology way. I mean, it really just hit me like, wow, that's fitting. 16 is equidistant between 8 and 24. And I think it speaks to just like thematically, like this, again, perfect complement, there's perfect balance for Kobe and like the different sides of him. Like, just Pau was perfect for Kobe. And Kobe was in a lot of ways perfect for Pau, and it will feel in very much like a celebration of Kobe that I think Pau will enjoy as well.
Yeah. And I think a lot of players, because I think there are very few moments in a player's career where, you could honestly say, like, just today, I would like the attention to be on me. I would like it to be about me. I would like it to focus on what I accomplished. And so much of Pau's time as a Laker was framed through, was he good enough to play with Kobe? Was he not? Was he providing this? So it's like, clearly the B on that player as opposed to the A, Hall of Fame caliber, but nonetheless, the supporting guy in support.
It's not a Kobe Shaq thing.
No. No, there's a clear hierarchy. I also think, like, if you got to pick somebody who's willing to share that time and accept how his moment is no longer 100% his anymore. His one day that should have been just about him, or whatever he chose to make it be about, isn't going to be. I also think you can't find somebody better than that than Pau.
Look, we know this in part because we've seen how Pau has taken it upon himself to look after Vanessa Bryant and those kids. I mean, he's really stepped up in ways that are incredibly touching. But we also know this just because, having been around Pau many years covering him, he's just an incredible human being. Like, he's an incredible person. Everything you ever heard about him is true.
As far as I could tell, he'd be one of those people that if you found out secretly was just a total bleep hole, it would be really disappointing.
It'd be like Tom Hanks type level. It would be really upsetting.
Really upsetting. So anyway, more, the Lakers getting towards training camps, and more stuff's going to be kind of popping up. Please leave us comments on the YouTube page, Locked On Lakers on YouTube. Any mailbag stuff, any questions you leave, we are definitely in a space, particularly as we head in training camp, where if you leave questions, we will answer them. We'll make you part of the show. So make sure you do it there at Cam Brothers on Twitter, or you can do it at KamenetskyBrothers@gmail.com, the iTunes show page, wherever you can find us. Leave us some questions, be part of the show, and we'll wrap you in there. But other than that, Andy, I think that's it. We'll see everybody next time.